All right. Thanks for stopping by. So today's video is the one you've been waiting for. I will be disclosing all of my campsites from the last 5 months, and the GPS coordinates will be in the top of the picture. So you can just punch those into your GPS or your Google Maps app, and it'll lead you either right to it or pretty close. So let's get into it. So this was the first campsite. This is the only pay campsite in the whole bunch. This is the one where it's in Red River, New Mexico, and I drove there and met up with Hobo Joe on the go, and she was already at this campsite, and it was already established. Beautiful place, had a creek running right through the campsite. I mean, the place was just beautiful. And it was cold in the mornings and cold in the evenings. In the daytime, highs were about 75 or 80. It was just beautiful. And that was in mid September. We stayed here for about 4 nights and then headed south, took a day trip through Taos, and then on to Santa Fe. And that's the site that's coming up next. Now, every campsite from here out will be free, and again, the coordinates are up at the top of the picture. This is in National Forest land, which is right next door to BLM land, so either or, you're still going to get a free campsite. It's about 5 to 10 miles outside of the city of Santa Fe, just to the west. This was a good spot. We stayed about 5 nights here. I caravanned with Hobo Joe to this site. We ran into Max and 3 or 4 other people, and we had, campfire in the evening. It was great. And also ran into Jerry. He's a viewer to the channel. So hello to you, Jerry. It was good meeting you there. I learned a lot at this campsite. This is where I learned about tarp awnings and how strong the winds can be in the desert, and what tarps to use and what tarps to not use, and how quickly they can rip out of a grommet due to the high winds. Now it's still September at this point, so it was hot during the day. I think we were about 6,000 feet elevation at this campsite. All right, moving right along. So this campsite is just north of Flagstaff. So we're talking about the last week of September when I arrived at this one. And at this point, I am rolling solo. I stayed at this campsite for at least a week, maybe 2 weeks. I had 2 or 3 different sites at this campground. This campground is owned by the city of Flagstaff, I believe. It's not National Forest, I don't think. And it's about 5 miles north of downtown Flagstaff. This campsite is where I started honing my skills on how to set up camp and break camp, and how to have enough supplies on hand to last you a week without having to go into town every day. I really learned a lot at this campsite on how to do things when dispersed camping in van life. And from this campsite, you can see Humphreys Peak just to the north, like you're looking in the direction of the Grand Canyon. Okay, next up, I left Flagstaff. I went north toward the Grand Canyon to Tusayan, which is a little town just south of the entrance to the Grand Canyon. It's a good bit of free dispersed camping here. Again, the coordinates are on top of the picture. And this, unfortunately, this campsite, most of this is underneath a helicopter flight path. So I hope you like helicopters, because they are running back and forth, taking the tourist from a parking lot in Tusayan up to do the Grand Canyon tours. All day long, they go back and forth, and they're only a few hundred feet off the ground when they fly. I only stayed there 2 nights. Now, next, I went back south toward Flagstaff to a free dispersed campsite near the trailhead of Red Mountain. This was a beautiful spot. Several places to choose from. I did an entire video about this spot. Huge campsites. I think I spent 3 nights here. And this must have been around the first week of October, and there was some decent trees on these campsites. Next up, I headed back south of Flagstaff to a little place off Interstate 17 called Munns Park. You'll actually go through the town and through a neighborhood headed east off of 17. And at the end of the neighborhood, the road turns to dirt and turns into a forest road. And you just pick your site. There's several to choose from back in here. I think I spent 2 nights here. It's heavily forested. I think it rained the whole time I was there, but the forest roads didn't get too muddy. They were still passable. It's a good spot. After this, I went back to Flagstaff, got some supplies and water, and then headed southwest down 89A towards Sedona. And about a third of the way down before you get to Sedona, you'll see Forest Road 237. Lots of free dispersed camping here. This is where I encountered 2 nights of a hailstorm, and I was so afraid it was going to damage my solar panels. And I got lucky and nothing happened. But it was a brutal hailstorm. 2 nights of it at this campsite. Moving right along, I'm trying to be brief because I am trying to be courteous of your time, but I still want to give you some details of each site. So we continued on down southwest through Sedona, did a day trip through Sedona, checked out Red Rocks, and in the late afternoon I started looking for a campsite, and I found some BLM land right off of 89A west of Sedona, like you're headed to Cottonwood. Several places to choose from down here. I did about 3 nights here in 2 or 3 different locations, but they're all within a mile or two of each other. So I dropped the pin at the first site. After you leave this place, you can also continue on southwest down 89A toward Cottonwood, and you'll see a forest road. I think it's 500 or 525 off to the right. Several dispersed places off that road too, but it's closer to Cottonwood than it is to Sedona. But they're great spots. Enjoyed the time here. Next up was one of the most beautiful campgrounds you will ever see. It's near Jerome, Arizona, up on Mingus Mountain. And you know what? I did misspeak. This was a paid campground also. I think it was $10 a night. I did 2 nights here. This place is incredible. It is very windy, however, up on top of the mountain, but the views are just amazing. I have never seen stars like I saw at Mingus Mountain. And the elevation, I think, is over 8,000 feet. So at this point, we're into early October. And this was a gem. It really was. Just a beautiful place. Next up is a place down near Wickenburg in a little town called Congress. And it's BLM land. And it's nothing really special here. There is some mountain ridges around the campground. Again, it's totally free. It was starting to get really hot during the day at this point. I think I was only here 2 nights and I was ready to move on. It was one of my least favorite sites in the whole group, but if you just need a place for a night or two, you'll enjoy it. Continuing on now, I headed south. This is called Saddle Mountain BLM land. It's right off of I-10 west of Phoenix. I think I did 5 nights here. This is when the weather started getting hot and unpleasant, and the flies at this campground were just unbearable. Ended up just having to break camp and move on. Went to Havasu, and this is it. When I rolled into Havasu, I was amazed. I didn't know it was such a large town. I thought it was much smaller than that. And Lake Havasu is just beautiful. You know, it's fed by the Colorado River. This campground is about 5 miles north of town, and all the supplies you will need are right within 5 miles, from water fill stations to your Home Depots and Walmarts and all that good stuff. This was a great place. Now, I'd put the pin here at Craggy Wash, but I also stayed on the west side of 95 at a unnamed BLM land, and it was really nice. I mean, Havasu holds a special place in my heart. I think I did probably a total of 3 weeks here, maybe even more than that. But I did move around a lot in Havasu, but here's the pen where you can get to this place and you can find the rest pretty easily. Okay, next up, I'm getting a little out of sequence here, but this is BLM land that's on the California side of the Colorado River near Parker, but I think it's still considered Parker BLM land. And it's just a few miles over the river on 62. And this was where the windstorm went on for 30 hours. That must have been in late January. It was a 2-night event here. It's not a pretty place at all. It's a very barren land. There are some washes and hills, but I would not recommend it. But if you need a place for a night or two, this will work out for you just fine. Okay, moving on. So I'm jumping out of sequence a little bit here because I'm skipping over a lot of the quartzsite campgrounds or campsites because quartzsite's just too easy. You know, I'm going to skip over that for now, and we're going to take you down here to Kofa. This is Palm Canyon camping in Kofa, just south of Quartzsite. I guess it's, 15 miles south of Quartzsite. And there's your coordinates up on top of the picture. And this is near the Spiral Labyrinth, which a lot of people know about. A lot of good campsites in Kofa. The only thing I have to tell you about here is this is the place where the forest ranger reminded me to not pull your vehicle past 100 feet off the main road because they're trying to keep damage to the vegetation down to a minimum. So that's the only thing you'll have to deal with in Kofa. You may have to camp near the dirt road, and it can get a bit dusty when all those dune buggies drive by on the weekends. So this brings us up to the last place. Again, I skipped over every campsite in Quartzsite because there was just so many of them so close together, and it's just too easy. You can find those on your own, no problem. So once I got my fill of Quartzsite, I headed to Tucson. This was the last site, and it was a pleasant surprise. This is the one that was so filled with all the vegetation and saguaros and ocotillos and all of those cactus and plant life. This is off East Parklink Drive. This is north of Tucson, probably about 20 or 25 miles. There's the coordinates on top of the picture. This was a great place. And the green marker here is not where I stayed. I stayed right over near the red pin on the picture. It was actually better and less crowded on that side of the road. It was a beautiful place. I mean, the weather was great there. I just like the topography and everything about this campground. So in ending, I did go a little bit longer than I thought I would, but I think this video will prove to be a good resource for you in the future, and I hope it helps. And again, thanks for stopping by. Take care, be well, and smash the bell.